There's a particular kind of silence inside money. I'd forgotten it. 3 years away, and the second those iron gates swung open, it came rushing back. That hush, like the whole world had been told to lower its voice. The car climbed the private drive through a fog so thick it seemed to be deciding whether to let us through, and the Vale estate rose out of it the way an old grief rises out of a quiet afternoon, slowly, then all at once. I told myself I was only here for the work. I'm a restoration architect and a good one, the best in the Northeast if you believe the awards, and I've stopped pretending I don't. I rebuild the things people swear can't be saved: cracked foundations, burned cathedrals, 200-year-old staircases that everyone else condemned. So when the commission came through a holding company called Ashford Vale Heritage asking for the lead architect on a major garden restoration, I read Ashford and assumed it was the hotel family. I didn't read closely enough. I was tired, and I had a daughter to feed, and the check had more zeros than I'd ever seen on one line. On the seat beside me, my phone screen glowed with a photo I'd taken that morning, a little girl, almost 3, mid-laugh, gray eyes squeezed half shut. I turned it face down. Some things you don't carry into a stranger's house. I should have read the contract closer. The foreman met me in the grand entrance hall, all scaffolding and dust sheets and that smell of old plaster I love more than I'll admit. He handed me the master plans, and I unrolled them across a sawhorse table the way I've done 1,000 times, half my mind already on load-bearing walls and water damage. Then I saw the title block, and in the corner, in clean architect's lettering, the name of the owner: Sutton Vale. I have steadied a collapsing staircase with my bare hands and not flinched. I read that name and my whole body went still, like the building itself was holding its breath with me. The wedding restoration I'd been hired to lead, the pavilion I was here to bring back to life, it wasn't for some Ashford gala. It was for his engagement. The pavilion was where he intended to propose. I could have walked out right then, broken the contract, lost the biggest commission of my career, and handed my competitors a story they'd dine out on for years. She took the Vale job and ran. Or I could be a professional, do the work, survive 11 days. 11 days until the engagement party. I held that number in my hand like a coin I could spend. I stayed. He found me in the half-restored pavilion that afternoon, in the kind of light that makes ruined things look forgivable. I heard his footstep before I turned, and I knew it. 3 years, and I knew the exact weight of him crossing stone. Sutton Vale, white-knuckle composed, polished the way old American money polishes his sons, and underneath it, when he saw me, something coming apart at a speed only I could read. He stopped a careful distance away. We stood there in a silence that had 3 years folded up inside it. They told me the architect was the best in the country. They didn't tell me it was you, he said finally. Mr. Vale. I kept my voice level, the way you keep your hand level carrying something that could shatter. I'll have the pavilion ready in time for your party. That's all either of us needs from each other. 11 days, he almost laughed, and it didn't reach anywhere good. You're going to stand here for 11 days and call me Mr. Vale. I'm going to do my job. I had imagined that moment 1,000 times. In every version, I was stronger. In none of them did my voice nearly break on the word Vale. He looked at me the way a man looks at a house he used to live in, surprised it was still standing, grieving that he no longer had the key. Then he nodded once and left me alone with the work. I waited until I heard the door before I let myself sit down on the cold stone. You have to understand how it was before to understand why I ran. I met Sutton restoring his late father's library. The old man had built it to impress people and then died before it could fall down, and Sutton hired me to save it. He kept finding reasons to be on site, a question about the cornices, a concern about the east window. He'd stand in the doorway with his sleeves rolled up, pretending he understood a word I said about humidity control, and I'd pretend I didn't notice him noticing me. It was real. That's the part nobody believes about a girl from Baltimore and a man with his name on buildings. They think it must have been the money or the rescue or the fairy tale. It wasn't. It was two people who couldn't stop talking, who'd close down the site at midnight and keep going in a diner because neither of us wanted the night to be over. He never once made me feel like a project. He made me feel like the only standing thing in a world he was tired of holding up. And then there was a night, 3 years ago, when I had news. The kind of news that changes the shape of every room you walk into. I was on my way to find him, light as air, when I passed his mother's study and heard voices, and I made the mistake of slowing down. People think the worst betrayals are loud. They're not. The worst ones are spoken at a reasonable volume, by reasonable people, in a beautiful room. His mother first, Eleanor. "The board will never accept it, Sutton. Not her. The merger collapses the moment the Ashfords see who you've chosen." And then a second voice, softer, warmer, a woman I didn't know, reasonable as a knife laid down gently on silk. "I'd hate to see everything your father built fall apart over sentiment. Some women understand they're a season, not a structure." I put my hand flat against my stomach where the news was, and I made a decision I would spend the next 3 years deciding was either the bravest or the most cowardly thing I'd ever done. I left before I could be left. I never told Sutton what I'd heard, and I never, ever told him about the baby. Her name is Margaret. I call her Maisie. She's almost 3, and she has her father's eyes. Not eyes like his, the exact gray, the kind that goes silver when she's about to cry and storm dark when she's decided she's right about something, which is often. The first night at the estate, I sat in the rented cottage at the edge of the property and video called Theo, my business partner and the only person on earth who knows the whole of it. He was babysitting back home, Maisie a warm smudge asleep on his shoulder. "Nadia!" He said my name the way you'd say it to someone standing too close to a ledge. "You're restoring the man's wedding pavilion, with the daughter's eyes staring at you from your lock screen. At what point do we admit the universe is not being subtle?" 11 days, Theo. I'd made it a prayer by then. I finish the job, I take the check, and Maisie never has to know there was anything to walk away from. And him? He could pass her on the street and never know. That's the deal I made with myself. But every morning I worked under those gray northern skies, I'd look up and feel them, those exact gray eyes looking back at me from the bones of his house. I had built a whole life, a company with my name on the door, a daughter who fell asleep certain the world was safe. I had done it alone, and I had done it well, and I needed Sutton Vale to see that I was not a woman who'd come back to be rescued. The trouble is, I hadn't yet met the woman who'd built my exile. Camilla Ashford Reyes came to inspect her wedding venue on the 4th day, and she was lovely. I want to be fair about that. She was gracious and quick and funny and complimented my work in a way that sounded like it cost her nothing, which is its own kind of wealth. "You're wonderful at this," she said, turning a slow circle in the half-finished pavilion, a glass of wine she wasn't really drinking in her hand. "Making old things look like they were never broken. It's a gift, knowing what to restore and what to let go. Some things aren't broken. People just decide they're finished with them." She smiled at me then, and it was a beautiful smile, and there was a blade somewhere inside it. "Sutton mentioned you two knew each other a long time ago. I'm so glad it's not awkward." I'd met women like Camilla in every grand house I'd ever worked in. They don't raise their voices. They don't have to. They stand very close to everything they intend to own, and they smile. I watched her go, and something snagged in me. Her voice, the particular music of it, the way "Let It Go" and "Some Things" sat in her mouth. I'd heard that cadence before. I couldn't place it. I told myself I was imagining things, and I went back to my keystone, and I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. He couldn't sleep. Neither could I. That's how we ended up alone in the pavilion near midnight on the 7th day. Me pretending to check mortar lines, him standing in the dark like a man who'd run out of rooms in his own house to hide in. "Just tell me one thing," he said. "Was it me? Did I do something, say something? Did I make you feel like you weren't—" He stopped, started over, quieter. "I've gone over every day we had. I can't find the one where I lost you." "It wasn't what you said, Sutton." The words came out before I could stop them. "It was what I heard." He went very still. "Then tell me what you heard." He was standing close enough that I could have told him everything, the study, the voices, the little girl asleep 3 towns over with his eyes. The truth was right there in my throat, warm and heavy, and all I had to do was open my mouth and set it down between us. "It doesn't matter now," I said. "You have a party in 4 days." I watched something in him close, gently, the way a man closes a door on a room he isn't allowed in. "Right," he said, "the party." And he left, and I stood there hating the silence and hating that I'd built it. It was Eleanor who broke everything open. Eleanor, who I'd spent 3 years casting as the villain of my own story. She summoned me for tea on the 9th day, and the woman who received me was not the woman from the study. She was smaller. Her hands shook around the cup. Old guilt has a way of folding a person. "I owe you a great deal of honesty," she said, "and I am too old to keep paying interest on it." She set the cup down. "I was afraid of you once. I'll admit that to your face. A merger, a board, 100 years of a name. I was afraid of what loving you might cost my son, and I said so in this very house the night you disappeared." "I know," I said. "I heard you." "You heard me say the board wouldn't accept it." Her eyes came up sharp. "Did you hear me say you weren't worthy of him?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Because, no, I hadn't. That hadn't been Eleanor's voice at all. "The woman who called you a season," Eleanor said, and her mouth twisted around the word. "Who said you weren't a structure. That wasn't family. Not yet. She only wanted to be. She summoned me weeks before, that girl. Frightened me with talk of the merger collapsing. Fed me every fear I had until I was repeating them like they were my own. And she knew, I am certain of it now, she knew you were coming to the study that night. She arranged for you to hear exactly what would send you running." The cup in my hands had gone cold. 3 years. 3 years I'd carried that night like a stone in my chest, certain of what it meant. And it took an old woman's shaking hands to show me I'd built my entire life on a sentence spoken by the one person who profited from me believing it. Camilla, the voice I couldn't place, the cadence I'd let go. "She's marrying him in 2 days. "Yes," Eleanor said, "unless someone who isn't a coward tells the truth in this family for once." She looked at me a long moment. "I'm sorry, child. I was afraid, but I never wanted you gone. The person who wanted you gone is about to become my daughter-in-law." I found Camilla the next morning, alone in the garden, and I didn't waste either of our time. "You knew I was coming to the study 3 years ago. You staged the whole thing for me to hear." She didn't even flinch. That's how I knew Eleanor was right. She turned, and the lovely mask thinned to something cooler underneath. "You were always going to leave. I just helped you understand it a few months sooner. You think a man like Sutton Vale ends up with a girl from Baltimore who fixes broken stone for a living? I gave you both a kindness. You should thank me. You gave me a lie. My voice didn't shake. I was almost proud of it. And you spent 3 years sleeping next to a man who's still in love with the truth. Something flickered then, just once, just behind the eyes. Then it was gone, and the blade was back. He's proposing to me tomorrow, in that pavilion you've made so beautiful. Whatever you imagine you came back to fix, you're too late, Nadia. Finish your little restoration, take your check, go home to wherever it is you went. She was right about one thing. I was too late to undo what she'd done, but I was just in time for something else. Because somewhere underneath all her certainty, she'd forgotten the one thing I'd come back already knowing. I had never needed Sutton Vale to be somebody. I'd become somebody on my own, with a child on my hip and a company built from nothing and a name people now said with respect. And that is the kind of woman you do not get to manage. I decided I wouldn't crash the party. I wouldn't beg. I'd finish the pavilion, the most beautiful thing I'd ever built, and I'd leave one truth behind in it. Then I'd let Sutton Vale choose for the first time in 3 years, with the lights on. The engagement party filled the pavilion at golden hour. Champagne, soft music, 200 people who'd never had to read a contract too carefully in their lives. I was there because the contract required me to be, to formally hand over the completed restoration. I stood at the edge in a dress that was mine, not bought for the occasion, and I watched a man reach into his pocket for a ring. And then I watched him stop. Eleanor had spoken to him. I could see it in the way he stood, a man who'd been handed half a truth and couldn't unhear it. "Before I do this," Sutton said, and the music faltered, and 200 faces turned. "I have to hear a whole story from the one person who never got to tell it." He turned, and he looked at me across all those people. I should have planned what to say. I'm an architect, I plan everything. But the truth, when you finally set it down, doesn't need scaffolding. I told them what I'd heard, the study, the voices, the sentence about seasons and structures. I told it plainly, not to win him. That part was for me, for my own dignity, 3 years overdue. And I watched Camilla's face go the careful blank of someone calculating how much is already lost. "Sutton," she said, stepping in smooth as silk, "this is exactly the kind of manipulation I warned you about. The woman walks back into your life and suddenly there's a story." And there it was. That cadence, exactly the kind, the woman, a story, the same cool managing music from 3 years ago in the same beautiful kind of room. I watched Sutton hear it too, watched the recognition land in him like a stone dropped in still water. Eleanor said into the silence, quiet enough that only the front of the room caught it, "That's the voice, Sutton. That's the voice I let into this family." Camilla had run out of mask. But that wasn't the moment the whole room went silent. That came next. Because down the garden path, between the lanterns, came Theo. He hadn't been able to reach me, or maybe he'd decided for me what I kept failing to decide for myself, holding the hand of a little girl in a green dress. My whole heart walking on 2 unsteady legs across stone I'd laid myself. I watched a billionaire, a man who had bought and built and rebuilt half a coastline, go completely to pieces over the smallest thing in the garden. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He went down on one knee in his good suit in front of every important person he knew, and he just looked at her, at his own gray eyes looking back at him out of a face he'd never seen before and recognized instantly anyway. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice was wrecked. "Maisie," she told him, with all the confidence of someone who has never once doubted she was wanted. "Are you crying?" "A little," he said. "Is that all right?" She considered it. "Mama says crying is just love with nowhere to go." I had said that to her. I'd forgotten saying it. And I stood at the edge of the most beautiful thing I'd ever built and watched my words come back to me out of my daughter's mouth in front of her father on the night he was supposed to propose to someone else. He didn't offer me the ring that night. I want to be clear about that because it matters. That ring was made for a story that wasn't ours, and a woman who could fall back into a man's arms simply because he opened them is not a woman who built what I'd built. The party scattered. Camilla left the way her kind always leaves, chin high, damage already being spun into a more flattering shape. And the next morning, in the quiet, with Maisie asleep in the cottage and the garden empty, Sutton came and found me at the pavilion's keystone. "I don't want you back the way I had you," he said. "I had a version of you who was new and scared and easy to lose. I want this one, the one who's terrifyingly good at her job, who raised the best person I've ever met, alone, and made it look like a choice instead of a wound, who needs nothing from me." He stopped. "Let me earn the rest, however long it takes." "Earning it," I said, "is the only way I'd ever let you have it." He smiled then, the real one, the one from the diner 3 years ago. "I can work with that." He didn't offer me the ring. He offered me something harder and better. Time and the truth on the table between us, and the chance to choose each other on purpose this time, with the lights on, for Maisie's sake first, and ours second. People asked me later if I was the one who got away or the one who came back. I never knew how to answer, because the truth is, I was neither. I was the woman who left to protect her own heart and walked back in to reclaim it. They told me once in a beautiful room, at a reasonable volume, that some women are a season and not a structure. They were wrong. I am the architect. I decide what gets built, and I decide what's worth restoring. Months later, there's a small hand that likes to find mine at the pavilion's keystone, stone I cut, stone I set, and press itself flat over my fingers like she's helping hold the whole thing up. Maybe she is. Her father steadies the ladder when I climb and pretends to understand what I tell him about load and weight and the patient way old things are saved, and I pretend I don't notice him noticing me. Some things aren't broken. People just decide they're finished with them. I decided I wasn't.